Hello and welcome to Newsclick. Today we have with us Professor Aijaz Ahmed, well-known political commentator, to discuss the latest events which are rocking what we call West Asia and North Africa and what the West calls the Middle East. Aijaz, we have had already this issue about Libya now being drawn into airstrikes by the Egyptian armed forces, essentially to respond to Egyptian Christians being killed there. Earlier, we had a similar kind of thing with Jordan. Jordanian Air Force bombing ISIS or IS, whatever it's now being called. Do you think the war that started essentially in Syria, then spread to Iraq, back and forth, now is getting much larger?
Well, I think that is one way of looking at it, this new sort of alignment against the Islamic terrorists and so forth. And this, the Libyan group is the group that has become part of Daesh, of IS or whatever one calls it. But I think there's something else that is specifically Egyptian, which is connected with this. One, Egypt has been on the one hand going after Islamicists in the Sinai. Alleging them to be connected with Al-Qaeda or more often with Hamas and so on. More recently, after the Davos meeting, when he returned Sisi with sort of accolades from all over the West, he came back and called upon the Egyptians to help him. So this escalation against Islamic terrorists on the part of Egypt is, I think, also tied up with his increasing difficulty at home with the Muslim Brotherhood and so on, and he wants to somehow tie up the Hamas, Sinai, this, that, and the other. So that's particularly Egyptian, a decision that he has taken. The other part in this is, again, specifically Egyptian. Sisi has not raged against Bashar al-Assad. He has not taken it. He has improved his ties with the Russians. More recently, they are trying to put together a group of opposition leaders distinct from the existing defunct one that the West has been pushing or overlapping with it for mediation in Syria. So in that links up with this new scenario that is developing of creating, of Jordan, you mentioned, changing its colors. It had been supporting all of those jihadis there, and now is bombing them, etc. And that, I think, in that we also have to watch where Saudi Arabia goes. The Saudis are now feeling the heat of the IS, which has called for strikes inside Saudi Arabia, and there has been a shift in dispensation in Riyadh.
Before we come to Saudi Arabia, quick question on Egypt. But Egypt's internal policies of cracking down on all shades from left to the Muslim Brotherhood still continues, and really no judicial supervision whatsoever. It's almost entirely military dictating to what kind of punishment should be levied, and a lot of democratic groups which had fought the earlier military dictatorship of Mubarak are all in jail now.
Yes, I mean, they're said to be, I mean, it's different kinds of figures keep flying around, but they're said to be around 40,000 political prisoners. And not all of them are Muslim Brotherhood. A lot of the liberal young revolutionaries of Tahrir Square, if that's what you want to call them, are in prison or in exile. A lot of them have fled.
There's also this recent tape which is now doing the rounds,
right,
that he has actually extorted money from the Gulf states in order to really bolster the military regime.
Absolutely. I mean, several kinds of tapes are there. One is this, really extorting money to do that on their behalf. Secondly, There are tapes of involving all the military high brass, which undermine the entire case against Morsi, and and their plotting is there on those tapes. There was some question of authentication of it, but a number of very of independent people who reliable people say that they recognize the voices. Those are authentic. So those tapes are, in a sense, explosive. But will they have any effect? I doubt it. And the Gulf countries now are so much at each other's throats. And the whole thing is shifting around so much. It's very unclear. On the one day we find that the leaders of the Egyptian Muslim Brotherhood, who were located for Qatar for quite a while, have been asked to leave Qatar. They're so angry with Sisi that they made his plane turn around midway. But they invite Ghanouchi, Muslim Brotherhood head of Tunisia. Is Saudi Arabia reconsidering establishing relations with Muslim Brotherhood as an ally against this IS, and other Islamists, which they have created over a long period of time, who have now become a danger to them?
Saudi Arabia is, of course, always an interesting question because it's 22,000 princes of different stripes, with now almost all the second generation being over. Now I think only 2 or 3 princes are left from the earlier Al Saud.
Most of them decrepit and unable to function, including the new
one who's supposed to be suffering already from dementia and so on. But you do see a change of guard in some sense, because there is the deputy crown prince who is from the 3rd generation, the first 3rd generation leader, and this seems to be an indication that he's going to be really the strong man of the regime.
He's going to be the strong man in the regime, probably the likely successor, unless some of the surprises come up. One great thing is that Bandar Abbas, the Prince Bandar Bush, some people call him, is out and gone.
Do you think that now Saudi Arabia is going to shift its position regarding Islamic terrorists, as you said just now, Daesh, ISIS, whatever we call them, or are they still going to see them as a strategic ally in the larger tussle with Iran, which is what they see themselves as competition?
Well, I think one major decision that they have to make is actually with respect to Yemen and the fiction that they have created, that the Zaydis, among whom the Houthis are the most prominent tribe and family, the Zaydi Shia are somehow a front for the Iranis. They have to revisit that fiction. But if they hold on to that fiction, and if they get mired now in that anti-Iran, anti-Shia sort of fantasy that they have, then they cannot break with IS and so on, and they'll get deeper into crisis. What they will do is very hard to predict, because this is a group that has been out of power.
Interestingly, the United States, originally the instigator of the rebellions against Syria, it's now reports are there that the special forces were there in Syria, both from Britain and from the United States in Syria, well before any public notice was taken of this. And it's clear Jordan was really the center from which all this was being driven. With Jordan getting knocked out in this particular fashion, do you think US is now having to reevaluate its position on the IS and on Syria and Iraq, Iran, all these issues? Or do you think it's still kind of playing both sides like Saudi Arabia?
I think it's still playing both sides. I think there is a very considerable disagreement within the administration over which way to go. here as well as in Ukraine. But they would find it very, very difficult to really go after IS themselves unless they have boots on the ground. So one thing is that even if there was an intention, there is no capacity, except for some really crazy people. Most of the US administration and public opinion, etc., is completely opposed to it. So they themselves cannot do it. All their allies in the region, main allies in the regions, mainly Saudi Arabia and Turkey, are deeply implicated with those jihadis. As you said, Jordan was the center of it from the beginning until about 3 weeks ago or something. Maybe we don't know what's going on now. And all of that paraphernalia is in Jordan. Jordan is not a big enough power to take care of IS all by itself. Again, they can bomb, Americans can throw in the drones and so on, but they cannot gain territory. So Americans, that is assuming that Americans want to do it. But the fact of the matter is that Americans need these jihadis all over the place. And they've been trying to, have their cake and eat it too, and it's not working.
Their basic thing is, it singes everybody. We are still protected by oceans and so on. And the only question is returning European Muslims who come back and may start something in their own countries. But even that doesn't affect the United States. So they have a distance. If they keep all this going, they still have a distance from this theater.
Sure. But they have their oil interests. But those unfortunately are not movable. They'll remain where they are. They have their interest with Israel, and which way this jihadism will eventually go, which faction of them will turn against Israel one of these days.
So a state of flux at the moment, whether it's Libya, whether it is Jordan, whether it is Iraq, where Iranian forces apparently are involved, or at least advisors are involved on the ground. And the only two powers who can provide boots on the ground are essentially Syria and Iran. And these are the two at the crosshairs of Saudi Arabia, at the crosshairs of Turkey, as well as the United States, and of course France and UK and so on. So still to see what happens, but things have started to change as the fires they have lit are starting now to singe their allies. Would you say that's a...
Yes, that is absolutely true. And I would say that the only country that seems to have had from the beginning an absolutely clear strategic line is Iran. It has known from the beginning that if it really comes to a fight, they will go in an extremely measured way. Americans and Daesh are not going to dictate how they go, where they go, at what speed. That to start with, the ammunition, the guidance will be theirs. The personnel will be that of Hezbollah. Hezbollah went in a big way from the beginning. Very open way from the beginning. It is still there. And they have very precise objectives to gradually clear up as much of the Syrian territory as possible, so that Damascus is protected, the main regions are protected, and slowly they get flushed out of the Syrian territory. That is it. This is not Iraq. That's all they, and that is going to take its own time. And they are not going to be pushed by American, the American calendar. So they're the only ones, in my view, who have had very clear strategic objective which they are implementing.
Let's watch what happens. I'm sure things are starting to change, and we will see basically most of the region re-evaluating. Those who have been on the side of Daesh in different forms will start to re-evaluate what they are likely to do, or Otherwise, they themselves are going to be increasingly affected. Thank you very much, Aijaz, for being with us. And we shall continue this discussion as and when the things change in West Asia.